Win big in 2023 with Team Sync from RotoBaller. Import your fantasy teams and sync your leagues. Get customized tools and tailored advice for your specific rosters and scoring settings, including live recommendations from the live draft assistant, free agent finder, and lineup optimizer. Sync an unlimited amount of NFL, MLB, NBA, and NHL fantasy teams from all of the major platforms. Get a discount for any premium pass, by the way, using my promo code Knuckler, KNUCKLER, like R.A. Dickey. Just visit rotoballer.com/radio and start rotoballing like a boss. Makes a great gift for that rotoballer in your life. And folks, before we get into this, if you have a gambling problem, you can call 1-800-GAMBLER, but you might want to think about having a cheat weekend, because we have UFC 292 coming up on Saturday. This is Brady Grove bringing you episode 106 of RotoBaller's official MMA podcast. Tap that. And we are looking forward to UFC 292 this weekend. And by the way, the PFL playoffs are also in action. Those are the two main MMA organizations going at it this weekend. LFA, KSW, of course. The Contenders Series right now is back on Tuesdays. It's been fantastic. You can find all of my picks for all other MMA promotions and bigger boxing matches, all combat sports, on Twitter at RotoBrady. Follow the podcast, like and subscribe. Leave favorable comments on Spotify, Facebook, YouTube, all at Tap That MMA Podcast. And I will be doing, by the way, the chat on Saturday from 11 a.m. to noon. Got to get that out of the way a little earlier in the day, but that's when people are looking to talk about it. So you can rest in the calm before the storm. And with me in the calm before the storm tonight, frequent guest co-host on Tap That. Give it up for Connor Bones Slone. Connor, how are things kicking down in Florida?
Man, it's going great down here. The weather's a little bit hot, but awesome besides that. Thanks for having me on again, Brady.
Dude, is it really like awesome down there? Because like it seems nuts.
It is nuts, but hey, I like the chaos. So for me, it definitely is. Maybe not for everybody listening. It's not want to do your research before moving to Florida, but it's pretty great.
And I don't know how I missed it for 2 years, but Connor recently shared the song with me, Who I Smoke.
Oh my Lord.
And I don't like, it changes my whole perspective on Jacksonville Jaguars games. Give that a listen, folks. You might find it shocking, but it's a super catchy song. Connor, UFC 292 this weekend. It's going to feature both of the finales for this season of The Ultimate Fighter. I haven't seen this week's episode yet. We're recording this on a Wednesday, but I know that Cody Gibson won because he's fighting Brad Katona for the Bantamweight Tough Championship. Brad Katona going for Tough title number 2. Kurt Hollabaugh is facing off against Austin Hubbard in the lightweight final. Fully expected Austin Hubbard to be there. I cannot say the same about Kurt Hollabaugh, and I probably feel that way too about Brad Katona and Cody Gibson. There are 12 fights on this card. It is going down in Boston, Massachusetts. Those people are scary sports fans, especially if they don't like you. The first fight of the evening on Saturday, when the card kicks off at 6, Marina Moroz in a women's flyweight matchup against Karine Silva. Andrea Lee fighting Natalia Silva at women's flyweight. Men's middleweight. This is such a good fight, and it's not going to get the attention of a lot of the other fights on this card, but this has all the makings of a dog fight. Gerald Meerschaert and Andre Petrosky. Then that is when Cody Gibson and Brad Katona, I think, will fight, and Kurt Hollabaugh versus Austin Hubbard will be next from what I'm seeing. Gregory Rodriguez then will fight Dennis Tialuolin at middleweight. Another middleweight fight, and this one has sadness written all over it. Chris Weidman versus Brad Tavares. You just hope that what you think's going to happen doesn't. Mario Batista against Damon Blackshear. Didn't we just see him at bantamweight? Another bantamweight fight right after that. Jump up in quality by a big margin. Marlon Chito Vera taking on Pedro Munoz. That's the number 7 and the number 12 bantamweights in the world, according to Tapology.com. Ian Gary was supposed to fight Jeff Neal, Connor, and it would have been a great fight. And Jeff Neal couldn't go through with the fight. And who steps in? Trusty old Neil Magny. What a G. Neil Magny, really kind of like an underrated RDA personality. That guy will throw himself into a lot of, disadvantageous situations, but he is a tough fight for anybody at 170 pounds on any given night. And Ian Gary should be very careful if he is overlooking Neil Magny at all. Then the co-main event, Wei Li Zhang defending her strawweight championship against Amanda Lemos. And then a big bantamweight championship fight. I thought Aljo as a personality was so boring just a few years ago. I kind of still do, but he at least commands a greater presence now.
Absolutely.
UFC bantamweight championship of the world, Aljamain Sterling, who after all this is the guy that came out with the belt. It's unbelievable. And he's defending that against Sugar Sean O'Malley, 16-1, claims to still be undefeated. And it's crazy, Connor. The first note on that, because we'll start from the top and move down. After the Chito Vera loss, people were so ready to be completely done with him. Everybody enjoyed it so much when he lost the way that he did to Cheeto. And, people would be very correct if they said that his personality and his fame contribute to his fight career. But that is part of what your career is at the top level of the UFC. And so, no matter what, for the wins that he did accumulate after the loss to Chito Vera, it is super impressive that Sean O'Malley is even in this position right now.
Absolutely, yeah. And trying to think, I think Sean O'Malley it's an interesting fight. It's an interesting matchup. O'Malley has a chance at the beginning of every round. Every round starts on the feet, but ultimately, I think Aljo is just going to sub him pretty quickly. I think it's going to be very reminiscent of the Corey Sandhagen fight. I can't imagine that Sean O'Malley has, significantly better grappling skill than Corey Sandhagen. So I don't know. What do you think?
Well, so the odds have it as where Aljo is the minus 258 favorite. Sugar Sean, the plus 210 underdog. Now, here's the thing, Connor. Stylistically, I don't want to compare it to the Corey Sandhagen fight because Corey Sandhagen, in my view, on most nights that he's out there, even in the 2 losses that he took, I might still think that he's the best bantamweight in the world. If you ask me right now, if Corey Sandhagen on Saturday instead was fighting Aljo, Jan, TJ, Henry, regardless of the history with him and any of those guys, I think I would pick Corey Sandhagen to win. And Corey Sandhagen just fell into that. He got caught. He fell into it. It happens against Aljo. That fight was ended before it really even started. Mm-hmm. But the thing about Aljo that does worry me for Sugar Sean is like Sugar kept Petr Yan's striking volume really low, even though Petr Yan was able to land 6 takedowns against him. And Sean O'Malley had to take that by a split decision that at the end of the day was a controversial decision that kind of split fans in their opinions. Aljo landed 135 strikes against Henry Cejudo. He landed 4 takedowns to 3 against Triple C. Landed 72 strikes and 5 takedowns against TJ Dillashaw. The thing is, Petr Yan, as that is a really impressive win for Sean O'Malley. Mm-hmm. It says that he is ready for the top tier of the bantamweight division, for sure. But, that Petr Yan that looked like the best boxer in the UFC for a minute is not the guy that we have seen in the last 3 fights. He looks like he has lost a step in his pace. He got, he got outfought in a close fight, round by round by Aljo in April of 2022. And then he just didn't do enough on the feet. He left it open for Sean to be able to take that fight on the judges' scorecards. And then he got absolutely worked by Merab the last time out, March of 2023. It's just that Aljo, as much as I hate to say it, has just looked better and better since he's been in this role. He has dominated guys that I think Petr Yan would struggle with right now. So I think that Sugar Sean O'Malley can win this fight. but he needs to have gotten a lot better in his game in the period of time that since he fought Piotr Jan, because that's something that he has, that ceiling, he has that room to grow, and he can be that dangerous on the feet. But even if he worked exclusively on takedown defense and all the time in between, he's not going to prevent Aljo from taking him down any less than 3 times unless Aljo puts the fight away on the ground earlier than that, or unless Sugar Sean puts it away earlier than that. But I don't like to, I could depend on a guy like Sean in a lot of like Conor McGregor's fights when he was still of a high quality, when it's like, his striking is so good that it's takedown defense. I think Sean O'Malley is going to have his moments on the feet, but ultimately, I think Aljo is going to be able to match a high percentage of his volume, and he's going to disrupt Sean with the threat of the takedowns, of which he will land at least 3 to 4 if this fight ends up going into championship rounds. So, I think Sean wins this fight like 25 times out of 100. And I think Aljo would have to have an off night. So, and I like Aljo, by decision, sure. I think Sean could maybe avoid getting subbed. I could see that. But also, Aljo by submission is plus 150. That is a solid value. And I think it actually is a much better value than Sterling by decision plus 225.
Yeah, absolutely. And kind of going back to the Peter Yan fight, he was pretty easily able to take down O'Malley. And I will say initially on first watch, I thought it was Yan. I thought it was his fight. I thought he won, I believe, the first and the third round. Looking back on it, when you rewatch it, it's actually a much more impressive performance from Sean O'Malley than I initially remembered, at least. And I can definitely understand scoring it for him. But that being said, his grappling didn't hold up extremely well in that fight. And, compare that to Aljo, who just fought possibly the best wrestler in UFC history. I think it's fair to put him in the top 3. Maybe there's somebody else that I'm not thinking of right now that would be better wrestler than Cejudo, but Aljo was able to take him down, and that was a close fight. It definitely wasn't complete domination. Henry really held in there, but I did think it was a clear win for Aljo, a very impressive win. And I just really can't imagine Sean O'Malley being able to defend takedowns any better than Cejudo can. But I don't want to rag too much on O'Malley here. He is a good grappler, and he's longer, and he may match up better physically with Aljo. But I just don't think he's going to be on the same level there.
No, and Sean is sick on his feet, and it's your best defense can be a really good offense, but I just don't think he's to that point. Aljo has peaked, and keeps climbing higher. Cejudo, I thought he beat Henry, and that's one of the few times where I'm happy to see Aljo win. Those two cringos were just made for each other. How can a dude that has spent so much time around Matt Serra be such a dork?
Very good point. I actually like Aljo a decent bit. I think he can be cringy. I think Cejudo is a little bit more cringy, but I think Cejudo's brand of cringy is a little bit more enjoyable. When Aljo is cringy, I don't think it's kind of a self-aware thing like it is with Cejudo. That being said, I do like Aljo. I thought he got way too much flack for the first Peter Yan fight because that was not his fault at all.
No.
It was just pretty blatant from Yan, so I thought that was a little bit overboard in the hate he got. I'm glad he came back and got the win. But overall, I don't know. Aljo seemed like a good dude. He's fun to watch fight. And one thing I think will play a big factor in this fight as well is Aljo's defense has improved tremendously. Striking defense specifically. He has really good movement. He uses his length really well to his advantage. And, I just don't see him getting caught with a big shot that Sean would most likely need to win.
Yeah, and so Sean by TKO knockout is plus 330. I don't think that's how it happens. Sean wins this fight. It is that he's able to hold Aljo somehow to, 4, even 5 takedowns. He could still get the win if he just lands enough strikes round by round. So O'Malley by decision plus 900, sprinkle a point.
Yeah, I mean, I might put $10, $20 on that. That's actually really good value. I was thinking the same thing. Like I said, Aljo's defense is really good. Sean O'Malley probably has a clear advantage on the feet. So I think if Sean is to win, it's going to be exactly like you said. He's just going to have to outwork him round by round, and it'll probably end up being a close decision. But I do think there's a viable path to victory for Sean, and that's exactly how it would go if that's the case.
Can you imagine the internet reverberation if Sean O'Malley takes this by a controversial split decision?
Oh, Lord.
Not be enough energy in the universe to contain the outrage and the simultaneous enthusiasm that will be out there. But to a great segue, because someone who has been on the receiving end of some controversial, unfortunate split decisions, we got Zhang Wei Li defending the women's strawweight title against Amanda Lemos. Now, Zhang Wei Li is the minus 310 favorite. Amanda Lemos, the plus 250 underdog. Let's start with Wei Li. She's on a 2-fight winning streak. One of them was like, that fight with Joanna was like almost the women's BMF belt fight.
Mm-hmm.
She beat Joanna by second round knockout back in June of 2022. Joanna retired right after. Rematch of one of the greatest fights of all time, the first one. And then she just came off winning the strawweight title back over Carla Cookie Monster Esparza November of last year by second round rear naked choke. 2 straight finishes in the second round. She outstruck Carla 37-6. It was a dominant performance. 2 straight dominant performances. But before that, from April of 2021 to November of 2021, 2 losses to Rose Namajunas. The first one, she got knocked out in the first round by a head kick. The second fight, as much as I love Thug Rose did not win that fight, but she got it by split decision. She did outstrike Zhang 86-83. She got taken down 5 times to 2. I just remember very distinctly that I thought round by round Zhang took that. But then we got Amanda Lemos, who's actually 2 years older than Zhang. She is also on a 2-fight winning streak, and a very a textbook 2-fight winning streak at women's strawweight to get you a title shot. A second round submission victory July of last year over Michelle Waterson Gomez, and then a third round knockout November of 2022 in the main event against Marina Rodriguez, third round knockout. Her only loss since her debut in the UFC that came in July of 2017 was in April of 2022 by first round arm triangle to Jessica Andrade. She also has wins over Montserrat Ruiz, Inoue Mizuki, Miranda Granger, and Angela Hill. It's like she looked really good in her last 2 fights. The Marina win means a lot to be able to put her away in the third round, but statistically, it's not like that was like a masterpiece of a performance. She was definitely the better fighter, but not by a tremendous margin. And then a win over Michelle Waterson Gomez. I love Michelle Waterson. I think everybody does. But at this point, even back in July of 2022, that is a win that you should be able to get if you're not just going to stand there and play Michelle's game, which is point striking, which will always land you in a close decision. If you're aggressive with Michelle in these later years of her career, that has worked out for almost everybody. So the one fighter that's really in the, classic top tier of this women's strawweight division historically, Jessica Andrade finished her, a little bit over a year ago. And Zhang is coming off 2 really, really dominant victories, but against 2 fighters too, that it's like, well, what does that mean at this point? Like Carla is very matchup prone. Carla just has Rose's number, but Zhang would probably beat Carla 98 times out of 100.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Weili Zhang, she is extremely powerful. She's a great grappler, and I think that's going to prove very troublesome for Lemos. Um, I think she knocks her out or outworks her in a decision, but I think Lemos wins this one maybe 25 out of 100, maybe even less than that. But that being said, her win over Marina was very, very impressive. So it's hard to counter out completely.
No, for sure. And I think Zhang wins this fight 80 times out of 100. And so minus 310, I'm not touching Lemos at plus 250. Prop wise, though, if I was just to go Wei Li inside the distance, that's minus 150. And I like that a lot. Now,
Yeah.
and if I'm going Amanda Lemos, I'm just going all the way. And this is crazy because for how much of an underdog that she is, Lemos by TKO knockout is only plus 450. I think it's by far her best prop, but I think it's by far her most likely chance to come away with this. Is just a good shot because she's capable of that for sure. She has power at strawweight. Her record reflects that. But this is just a different level of skill that we're talking about. And until I see Amanda Lemos get a victory, over someone who is in that like the top 4 fighters that were passing around this title for years, kind of like the bantamweight division for the men. I can't believe in her against Zhang Wei Liu, who is in her own right a boogie woman of this division.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing that I kind of think about here, and this may be wrong, it may be correct. I don't know. It's because it kind of depends on how you look at it. But the skill gap in women's MMA from the top contenders to the best champions seems to be a little bit bigger of a skill gap than in men's divisions. And I'm not sure, I don't. That's not a dig or anything. It's just Weili Zhang. She has been very dominant for all except for Rose. And I do agree that I think she won the second Rose fight. She made some great adjustments. She utilized her grappling. She looked good, even if she goes home with the split decision loss. But yeah, I think Zhang is just going to put it on her. And what's Zhang by submission? I feel like that might be an underrated pick that no one's going to consider.
It probably will. Zhang by submission is plus 400.
Yeah, I mean, hey, if you're feeling like tomorrow's going to be a grappling night, or not tomorrow, if you feel like this fight card's going to be a grappling night, maybe throw some money on that. I like that at plus 400.
Damn it, Connor, you got me excited thinking that this was already tomorrow. Next up, this is a great welterweight matchup. We're going to learn a lot about Ian Gary on Saturday because instead of Jeff Hands of Stone, wait, is that actually his nickname or it's something about having hands of some hard substance? I think it's Hands of Stone.
Sounds right.
Neil Magny versus Ian Gary at welterweight. Neil Magny, Connor is the plus 380 underdog. Ian
Wow.
is the minus 500 favorite. Well, let's start with Ian Gary.
Wow.
He is 5-0 in the UFC. He comes to us from I just want to get that part right. Comes to us from Ireland. I think that's what that flag is. Ian Gary, that sounds like a super Irish.
Yeah, it's definitely Ireland.
I'm mixing up the Cage Warriors guys all the time. There was an influx of them that all came like at the same time, and some of them are already gone, like Jack Shore. I get him mixed up with Ian Gary all the time, just on the optics. But Ian Gary is 5-0 in the UFC. 3 knockouts, 2 decision victories where he landed over 100 strikes. And that came against Gabe Green and Song Kenan. Gabe Green and Darian Weeks. The wins over those 2 guys, even before he beat Daniel Rodriguez by first round knockout May of this year, it was like, all right, Ian Gary, those are 2 really quality guys, and Gabe Green and Darian Weeks, they can be really hard to outwork on the feet. And he had volume, he had decisive, damaging strikes. People like him. He's a popular personality, and there's the hype has been well deserved. He's been on an impressive winning streak. And to knock out Daniel Rodriguez his last time out, the striking volume that this dude produces, you can't keep feeding him. You can't. This is a guy that you can't take that slow because he's just going to destroy people. And they're content to do that sometimes. But Ian Gary, born in 1997, his nickname is The Future. That is fair. Neil Magny, on the other hand, Connor's actually won 2 out of his last 3 fights, dating back to November of 2022. And that was the other thing about Gary, too. He's fought twice so far in 2023. Magny, 2 fights in 2023. His last fight was a split decision victory over Phil Rowe. He did get outstruck 34-29, taken down once. So, statistically, that's hard to come up with the win, on the judges' scorecards. In between, he was submitted twice in the second round by Shavkat Rakhmonov, June of 2022, and by Gilbert Burns at UFC 283, January of this year by first round arm triangle choke. He did beat Daniel Rodriguez November of last year by Darce choke in the 3rd round. And he had taken Daniel Rodriguez down 5 times, even though he got outstruck 66-57. Yeah, I mean, Neil Magny has been in the UFC for so long, and his activity level has been insane. It is amazing that he has made it to this far, still like legitimately hanging around the top 10, top 15. Wins over Johnny Hendricks, Kelvin Gastelum, Carlos Condit, Yi Jiangliang, Robbie Lawler, Jeff Neal, Max Griffin, D-Rod, and Phil Rowe. Oh, God.
Yeah, that's a very impressive lineup right there. And Neil Magny, he's been around for a long time, exactly like you said, and he's got plenty of cage experience. He's really good at fighting his fight. So, I'm going to imagine this fight, he's going to try to utilize his grappling and clinch work a lot. I think he could have some success there, but ultimately, I can't really imagine him beating Ian Gary. But I mean, at plus 380, that's tough to say. And I, really really am considering that how wide those odds are, because I do think he has a legitimate path to victory. I'd probably give Ian Gary 60 out of 100, maybe 65.
Yeah, so here's my real problem is like I don't think that Neil Magny, he might get outstruck by 30 or 40, if this fight goes the distance. And that's gonna put him in some bad spots. He very well could end up, early in the fight committing to going to the ground and getting 2 or 3 takedowns at least. Not to say that Ian Gary can't, but we just haven't really seen that be a huge problem for him at this point in his UFC career. And to beat a guy like Daniel Rodriguez like he did, that says a lot, because Daniel Rodriguez, is a pretty seasoned veteran of the UFC in his own right. And so I think Neil Magny has one very specific path to victory. I don't think that he wins a decision even. If it goes the distance, I still think that Gary landed more shots, the more devastating shots, and does more damage on the feet than Neil Magny can get in control time on the ground. I think Neil Magny's one route to victory that I think is a real possibility. Connor, Magny by submission is plus 2,200.
I might actually throw a few bucks on that. That's pretty crazy. I think that's definitely his most likely path to victory. And we really haven't seen Ian's ground game much at all, unless I'm not remembering a fight. But that smells kind of problematic for me. Magny's such a vet, and he's good on the ground. I think he's good enough to have Gary in some submission trouble. But I think ultimately it just depends on how much Ian Gary can hurt him on the feet before he even gets a chance to go for a takedown, or before he even gets a chance to go for a well-timed takedown.
No, and I think that, like, again, Neil Magny probably wins this fight maybe 30, 35 times out of 100. And that's a real big credit that I'm giving to him, because he is such a, I don't know, a pillar of this division, I think would be a good word for it. It's hard to define what Neil Magny's importance is to the UFC and to the welterweight division, but it's definitely significant. But Connor, Ian Gary got taken down twice by Song Kenan, once by Gabe Green, and once by Darian Weeks. He has only landed one takedown in his time in the UFC, and he's been taken down 4 times by guys that are not as good of fighters as Neil Magny. Maybe they'd beat Neil Magny right now, but definitely they don't have the well-rounded skill set of him. So again, how do I think Ian Gary wins this? I think, unfortunately, I'd have to say no. I don't know if he knocks him out. Maybe he does though. I'd say that Gary by TKO knockout plus 100. I don't know if that's as good about Gary by decision. This is a 3-round fight plus 200. I think maybe that's the more likely route to victory. Neil Magny, I think is going to get him down to the ground maybe once or twice, maybe 3 times. And that's when it starts to get Neil Magny winning territory. But I think that's why it's good. This really could go to the judges' scorecards. Gary by decision plus 200, I think, is the best pick for him. But my God, give me Magny by submission plus 2,200 all day. That is a bet on Neil Magny's experience level, and the fact that I think that Ian Gary has not faced a guy as highly skilled as Neil Magny. Probably there's a significant gap in skill between the best fighter he's fought and Neil Magny, and by all the best fighters that Neil Magny's fought, some of them that he's beaten. So, but it's so much more interesting than Ian Gary versus Jeff Neal. I mean, that was an interesting fight. But we just expect, well, It's Gary probably is going to win it, but it'd be a really meaningful win. But Jeff Neal is going to swing. Neil Magny is a puzzle, and he's always trying to figure out the puzzle that is his opponent. So I think the fight's much more intriguing now, as opposed to just being like a banger, someone's going to sleep.
Yeah, no, great points. And I mean, I definitely am disappointed that Jeff Neal isn't going to be the one here because I think kind of opposite of what you just said, that would just be a banger fight. You know, Jeff has really good hands. He's got quick hands. He's tough. And it would have been a great test for Gary, but I do think this one will kind of give us some better insight to how Gary's career is going to play out as a whole. I do like Neil Magny by submission to those odds, but if you're, team Ian Gary and you won't consider any other bet besides Ian Gary, I think by decision at plus 200 is very valuable.
And so for some reason, the next fight up on UFCstats.com is Damon Blackshear versus Mario Batista. We're going to go with it. Blackshear, the plus 180 underdog. Mario Batista, the minus 218 favorite in this bantamweight clash. Let's start with Damon Blackshear because he was just in the octagon, Connor, August 12th of 2023. That was 4 days ago. And he's fighting.
That has to be some kind of record, doesn't it?
I feel like someone else has kind of done, like, there has to have been somebody, but like, I mean, I'm surprised that you're allowed.
Yeah. I mean, if I'm remembering correctly, he got a quick sub, so I don't think he took much damage at all, but still very weird, especially if he's cutting weight. I'm sure he is, but maybe he's not doing it to the extent that some other fighters do it. But I think, honestly, that's the most dangerous thing about fighting back to back like that is having 2 weight cuts in a week. Like that's got to be horrible for you.
Yeah, and so Damon Blackshear, though, for his start in the UFC, 2 decision losses to 2 solid fighters in Yusuf Zaleo and a prospect in Farid Basharat. One as recent as March 2023 is when he fought Farid Basharat. Since then, June of 2023, bounces back with a second-round knockout against Leon Lacerda, outstruck him 66-28, knocked him out in the second round. It was a dominant performance. And then, yes, Connor, 4 days ago, he did win by submission, but not just any submission. He twisted Jose Johnson's ass in the first round. Everybody, when you see the twister coming, it's like when you're getting to the top of a roller coaster in a room of people that know what they're talking about. It's like, oh. So, pulling off a twister, it shows like, either you were really on or something went wrong, or there is a gigantic skill difference between you and your opponent. Jose Johnson was new to the UFC. You got to, factor that in, but very good bounce back for Damon Blackshear. And I feel like there's been a lot of fighters, especially since COVID and the picking up of the UFC event volume with the Apex, that, there are people that start to string together these wins in really short succession, and they become the toast of the town in the UFC for that year. Kevin Holland had a year like that. I feel like, Billy Quarantillo and guys like Gerald Meerschaert kind of had moments like that. Guys that, stayed really active and just, kept winning and finding good situations. And Mario Batista, he's actually a year older than Damon Blackshear. He is on a 4-fight winning streak. He has won 6 of his last 7 in the UFC, dating back to July of 2019. That loss, his most recent loss was to Trevin Jones by second-round knockout. That's rough. In March of 2021, his first loss was his UFC debut by first-round armbar to Corey Sandhagen. We will forgive him for that. Wins over Miles Johns, Jay Perrin, Brian Kelleher, Benito Lopez, and Guido Canetti. I am most impressed by the win over Brian Kelleher, which was now over a year ago. He has 1 win this year. That was the rear naked choke over Guido Canetti. Yeah, I mean, like, I think that these odds are accurate, but they are also deceiving. Like Mario Batista probably should be a minus 215, minus 218 favorite, just based off of how many more wins in the UFC that he has. Damon Blackshear is feeling himself after a 2-fight winning streak. Mario Batista's on a really good winning streak, 6 of his last 7 dating back several years. And, you have to sit there and say, well, I don't believe in magic. So fighting twice within 2 weeks, just because like you're feeling really good about it, doesn't mean that it's going to be a good thing when you're fighting a really good fighter. But I don't think you can discount momentum. And I was really impressed with Damon Blackshear's last win. It's just, he still hasn't beaten anybody of the opponent caliber to make me think that he should be favored in this fight. I don't want to pick with my heart on this one. When you pick with your heart, you bet on Anthony Smith to beat Glover Teixeira, and unfortunately, you bet on Walt Harris to get the win in that fight too. And that is just not how this sport works. So I think Mario Batista wins this fight 65 to 70 times out of 100. And I don't like it. Damon Blackshear's done really good at avoiding, both of his losses were by decision. He put both of his opponents away in the fights that he won. But like Farid Basharat and Yusuf Zalal really aren't finishers. Mario Batista is a finisher. Two of his fights in the UFC have gone to the judges' scorecards, and his last 3 wins are all by submission, 2 rear naked chokes and a triangle armbar. So given that, Batista by submission is for some reason not listed. They have Batista by submission in round 2, -180. They just haven't set these lines yet. This is the problem with recording on Wednesday. Anyway, I think Batista by submission is probably the best value. But other than that, I wouldn't try to split the hair again if you're not going by submission. And I think Batista inside the distance will ultimately be a really good value too.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And I'm just kind of looking at pictures of Blackshear to try to get an idea of how much he weighs, because I think that is going to be a significant factor here. I know I already mentioned it, but for all of you listening that have not done a weight cut before for a fight, it is truly the worst thing ever. So I think Batista's going to just come in sharper. He's going to have better cardio, be a little bit quicker, and he's got to find a good submission. And one thing I will say, I think I am uniquely qualified to discuss this fight because I have hit a twister once, and it was just basically pure luck, but had to mention that.
Dude, it's like the weight cutting is like Khabib had like 2 years to prepare for a fight with Tony Ferguson. The weight cut almost killed him. So doing it twice in one weight, you got to think that he's doing a Frankie Edgar thing and walking around at the weight that he's fighting at. Otherwise, that is bananas. And if I'm going Damon Blackshear too, I'm going inside the distance. I think either like these guys could win by knockout, they could win by submission, but I don't think that this fight is going the distance. And by the way, fight doesn't go to decision. It's listed at -10,000 because they haven't set that line yet. They're really setting me up stupid. Next up, we got another bantamweight matchup between Marlon Chito Vera and Pedro Munoz. Chito Vera is the -192 favorite. Munoz the +160 underdog. How quickly we forget about Chito. Let's start with Pedro Munoz. He has 1 win since February of 2021. That is against Chris Gutierrez by unanimous decision. There was the no contest with Sean O'Malley, July of 2022. But he had 2, not super bad losses by unanimous decision to Jose Aldo and Dominic Cruz, but he was definitely the second best fighter in the octagon with both of those guys. And the statistics are really similar. Aldo outstruck him 114 to 75. Cruz outstruck him 103 to 74. He did knock Dominic Cruz down once. His 2 wins since March of 2019 are Chris Gutierrez and Jimmy Rivera. And, you go back to when he had a 3-fight winning streak over Brett Johns, Brian Caraway, and Cody Garbrandt. And then he ran into a buzzsaw known as Aljo, Frankie Edgar, and those 2 legends that we just mentioned. Chito Vera. Talk about a guy who was the toast of the UFC for a second there. He was on a 4-fight win. And, first off, before that winning streak even happened, he finished Sean O'Malley in dominant fashion in the first round. August of 2020, derailed that hype train briefly. And at the time, it was looked at kind of like an embarrassment to O'Malley. But then we just kind of realized that, like, Chito's an animal. And he lost a close unanimous decision to Jose Aldo. Then 4 wins in a row from June of 2021 to August of 2022 over Davey Grant, who he landed 105 strikes against. 88 strikes against Frankie Edgar and knocked him out with a front kick in the 3rd round. Rob Font. He won a unanimous decision against Rob Font, even though he got outstruck 271 to 159 and got taken down once because he landed 3 takedowns on Rob Font. And then against Dominic Cruz, He wins by 4th round knockout in a fight that he was losing for sure, but he just started, he just rattled the Bella, Dominic. If it would have gone to the judges' scorecards, it probably would have still been close. But Cheeto has that ability, at least to knock out dudes that are like, past their prime, like Edgar and Dominic Cruz are guys that aren't, mature enough for that level of competition like Sean O'Malley was. But like, I'm kind of surprised that Cheeto isn't a heavier favorite in this fight.
I actually kind of think the opposite, and hear me out here. So, Vera Cheeto, he's definitely very, very powerful, and he's got some good skill, but his drawbacks are he relies a little bit too much on his power. He's not a volume guy. He's a very slow starter, kind of like Jan is. And honestly, I feel like that would have been a better fight, but that's a separate issue. But Pedro, I mean, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but has he ever been knocked out?
No, I was just looking at that and I was going, son of a bitch, he's never been knocked out. And
Yeah,
all the guys that he's fought, that is amazing.
Yeah, no, that man has a crazy chin. So I think Vera, his shots aren't going to affect Pedro as much as they do for other fighters. I think even if he gets a nice land, even if it's flush, Munhoz is just going to brush it off like it's nothing. So I see him outworking Vera, maybe mixing in the wrestling a little bit. What are the odds on that one? Because I may stick with Pedro here and throw some money on that.
It is Cheeto's the minus 192 favorite. Munoz is the plus 160 underdog. But you know what does bother me about this though is like the last time we saw Pedro Munoz put up a good striking volume number, and because he did put several people away in the first round, so not counting that against him, he landed 94 strikes against Jimmy Rivera back in 2021. But the win against Chris Gutierrez the last time out was just a bit too humdrum. And who knows how, we'd be looking at him now had the rest of that fight with Sean O'Malley played out. Would he have ended up getting a win in that fight? Would Sean O'Malley have made him look bad? I don't know. This will be at all times in the fight, closely contested. But I am starting to believe that, Cheeto has had, let's say, a combined 7 knockdowns in his last 3 fights that were all wins. And even the fight with Corey Sandhagen that he lost in March of this year, 128-58 on the striking. Corey Sandhagen landed 3 takedowns, and it was still a split decision. So Cheeto it's crazy. The striking difference that he's able to overcome because of the damage that he does with his strikes. I think that it's maybe a little too late in Pedro Munoz's career. Now, the problem is, too, I don't know how to pick an outcome on this one. I cannot go Cheeto by TKO knockout. I will go Cheeto by decision minus 105. And I think that if you're going with Munoz, I think you go with Munoz by decision as well, plus 225.
Absolutely. I think Pedro by decision definitely has some really solid value. And one thing I want to make clear, very clear to any listeners, if you did not watch Cheeto versus Corey Sandhagen, that was absolutely the worst split decision probably in the history of the UFC. It was atrocious. Vera got beat every single round, but you still make a good point. Even though that call was ridiculous, your points were still valid.
No, it's like some fighters are just good at that. Michelle Waters was always good at that, like just slowing you down to her pace. And it does. Michelle Waterson, if she could fight the best fighter in the world, if that fighter doesn't put Michelle away, that still might go to a split decision. Yana Kunitskaya is kind of like that. And Carla Esparza was like that. There's just some fighters that are just good at doing the things that will either, get them to win on the judges' scorecard or make it way closer than it really seems statistically. But next up, we got a middleweight matchup. And it would have been so good a handful of years ago. And it's Chris Weidman versus Brad Tavares. Weidman, the plus 220 underdog, the man who scored possibly, a top 5 upset in UFC history against Anderson Silva when Anderson Silva was doing Dancing with the Stars in there. Brad Tavares, minus 270 as the favorite. Let's start off with Brad Tavares. I have less to say about him. He's on a 2-fight losing streak. He's lost 4 out of his last 6. Granted, those losses came to Israel Adesanya. Edmund Shabazian by first-round knockout. Dricus Duplessis, who didn't knock him out. That was a decision. 113-82 on the striking for Duplessis. And then a loss his last time out by first-round knockout April of this year to Bruno Silva. Wins in between. So he beat Christoph Jaka all the way back April of 2018. His only 2 wins since then are decision victories over Antonio Carlos Jr. and Omari Akhmadov. He landed a combined 138 strikes in those 2 fights, but it was a split decision with Akhmadov. Chris Weidman, born in 1984. He has 1 win in his last 4, 2 in his last, 8. Those wins were against Kelvin Gastelum, July of 2017 by third-round arm triangle. His last win was a unanimous decision victory over Omari Akhmadov, August of 2020. Akhmadov outlanded him 33-29 on the feet, but Weidman won the takedown battle 5-4. His last fight was April of 2021. He got knocked out in the first round after 1 strike was thrown against Uriah Hall. And that was what was the injury in that one?
It was a leg snapped in half. He
Jesus
got
Christ.
the curse from Anderson Silva. Let's hope he doesn't pass it on to Uriah Hall, who he did that against. Or Uriah Hall.
2020 just brought with it a bunch of leg snapping. That's a crazy injury to come back from. And, granted, the losses he took in that time were to Luke Rockhold, Yoel Romero, Gegard Mousasi, Jacare Souza, Strikeforce best that he lost to, Dominic Reyes, and then Uriah Hall in a loss that kind of doesn't count. But he had a 4-fight winning streak before that against Anderson Silva, Lyoto Machida, and Vitor Belfort, taking on Brazil's best. Oh God, Connor, the thing is like, I wish Chris, like, coming back from that injury at this point, after so many losses, like, how many times do we see that work out for somebody? Brad Tavares has at least been active. And the guys that have beaten him, it's not like there was a significant amount of damage done to him at that time. He lost to world-class fighters. He beat, very middle-tier fighters. And really, he's only ever beaten really middle-tier fighters. But is that what Chris Weidman is at this point? I think, comparatively speaking, probably. But minus 270, that's heavy, but I still have to roll with it. I think all the factors with Chris Weidman going into this, the lack of activity, all the losing and the damage to his body. I like Chris Weidman, I think. I mean, he's kind of vanilla. As Michael Bisping once said, Luke Rockhold and Chris Weidman couldn't sell tickets to their fight if they were working at the booth. But Brad Tavares, I think, wins that fight by unanimous decision. I think he wins the fight probably 80 to 85 times out of 100. Tavares by decision is plus 180. Smack it.
So I got a strong opinion on this one. First of all, both of these guys, amazing fighters. They both had really long, good careers already. Chris Weidman more so than Tavares, but they both have fought nothing but killers, just like you said. And I think that's one thing people kind of look past for on Tavares is, they see his record, they see he doesn't have any knockouts, and they kind of unfairly grade him, if in my opinion. I do think that Tavares has a good amount of power. He just, hasn't been in the situations to use it very much. With that being said, I definitely think Tavares is going to get KO here. And I'm sorry, Chris, I guess I like you too, but he just, old, too many miles, and Tavares is by no means, firmly in his prime, but I think he's, in a much better shape than Weidman is at this point.
Yeah, I guess maybe I do think TKO knockout's a pretty good possibility too. Again, all the other life factors for Weidman. The guy.
What are the odds on that Tavares KO?
Tavares by knockout plus 130. So I think that's probably a slightly better value, if not equal to the value of Tavares by decision plus 180.
Yeah, with that's tough. That's tough. Plus 130 isn't a huge return. I still think Tavares by KO is a good bet, but by decision, also not a bad bet.
And like the real thing is, like, can Chris Weidman maybe land a takedown or two that prevents him getting finished. That's still a lot speaking to his age and his health, but we will see. That's what makes it a very interesting and concerning matchup. And next up, we got more middleweight action. Gregory Rodriguez against Dennis Tuyalulin. Very fun name to pronounce. And he's not Hawaiian, folks. He's European or Russian. Their flag has some white and blue and red in it, like a lot of established countries. Tuyalulin, plus 280, the underdog. Gregory Rodriguez, the minus 355 favorite. Rodriguez, winner of 2 of his last 3, but he lost his last time out by first round knockout January of this year to Bruno Ferreira. 2 wins in a row before that to the guys that, occupy the middle tier of this division and occupy a lot of late prelim, early main cards for fight nights. Julian Marquez and Chidi Njokuani, he knocked both of them out in the first and second round, respectively. The other guy to beat him was Armin Petrosian by split decision and Jordan Williams in the Contender Series, but wins over Dusko Todorovic and Jung Young Park. Tuyalulin, 4 years older, he will have a 2-inch reach advantage. He is the loser of 2 of his last 3 fights. And there's only 3 fights in the UFC. He has a loss by first round rear naked choke to Jung Young Park, February of this year. A second round rear naked choke loss in his UFC debut, March of last year, to Ilasakov Kizraev. And Connor, it's not good news who his one UFC victory is. It was a second round knockout over Jamie Pickett, September of last year. So to me, for the purposes of winning in and trying to move up tier wise in the UFC, for judging the level of competition, a win against Jamie Pickett means very, very little to me, even though he got the win. No, he lost to Josh Fremd. He, I guess, had some moments in that one, but Jamie Pickett should not be in the UFC anymore. He probably never really should have been there. He had the physical tools. He just has never really executed against anybody of quality. Gregory Rodriguez is going to win this fight. I don't believe Lulin at all. Minus 355, I think, is actually kind of generous. Rodriguez, I think, Tia Lulin's only been submitted so far, but I don't think that's going to matter. I think Rodriguez knocks him out because that's how he's gotten his last 3 wins. He did it to Jung Young Park, Chidi, and Julian Marquez, for God's sake. Rodriguez by TKO knockout. And so, I think we went back to Tavares, I think, wins that fight 80 times out of 100. Going back to, and I probably said 60 to 65 for Cheeto. Got to get those numbers in. Rodriguez, I think, wins this fight 85 times out of 100. By TKO knockout, plus 110. I love it. Hit it.
Oh! No, absolutely. I agree with you there. RoboCop is an absolute beast. He's got some crazy power. Jamie Pickett is definitely not an impressive win. I thought you were going to say Sam Alvey, which would have been even worse. But hey, maybe we should bring Alvey and Pickett back to the UFC for a main event. Why not? That'd be hilarious.
There's a very select list of guys in the UFC that hung around way too long that it's that win means nothing to me. It's called the KB Bular rule to me. But I think we have well agreed on the outcome of that fight. And moving on, this is where it's starting to get real fun. We're getting into the Ultimate Fighter finales. And since we're going top to bottom, we're talking about the lightweight finale first. It is between Austin Hubbard and Kurt Holloway. You would guess that Holloway would be the underdog in this one. I think I even said on Twitter yesterday, someone was saying that Kurt was going to beat Austin Hubbard. And I was like, I would have this at least minus 115 for Hubbard, minus 105 for Holloway as a slight underdog. But, the odds makers believe that Austin Hubbard has a distinct advantage here. And that's the thing, is that Kurt Holloway in his fight with Jason Knight looked phenomenal. And that's because Jason Knight was the perfect matchup for Kurt Holloway to produce a barn burner. And I think Kurt Holloway was probably just a little too good at the fight that they were playing. Jason Knight could have made it more of an MMA fight and got to the finals. He did the not as smart thing and kept exchanging. And so it was a great matchup for Holloway. And to that end, Austin Hubbard in his fight, I thought Roosevelt beat him in the semifinals. It was close, and neither of them did what they needed to do to feel good about a decision there, because they were treating it like a spar. And this happens all the time on the Ultimate Fighter, Connor. I hate it so much. They get so involved with this team garbage. And they do the whole episode where Roosevelt's like, yeah, I don't really like Brad. Why don't you just put on a blue jersey? It's like, put on a purple jersey. Who cares? This is not a team sport, man. And you guys just started doing this like 3 weeks ago with each other. And then like that soon in, it's like, well, I guess I'm going to take it light on Austin because we're buddies. And it's like, what the hell are you talking about? You're almost back to UFC, man. Everything is about how this is a life-changing make or break thing. And so the team nonsense really is annoying. And it showed because Austin Hubbard and Roosevelt knew everything about each other. So they took it really light on it. It was a not great fight and one that I thought Hubbard should have lost. I think a lot of people saw, Hubbard and Roosevelt being the most realistic lightweight final. But Austin Hubbard, besides the wins that he has on the Ultimate Fighter, he was 1-2 in his last 3 fights in the UFC. He has a good number of fights. He had that fight against Max Roscoff that started the whole should your corner throw in the towel discussion. His last win in the UFC was a unanimous decision over Dakota Bush. He lost by unanimous decision August of 2021 against Vink Pichel, who outstruck him 71-56, even though Hubbard landed 4 takedowns. Kurt Holloway does not have a win in the UFC. 5 losses and a no contest. 2 of those came back in 2013. Remember these names? He lost to Pat Healy and Steven Seiler. Then makes it back through the Contender Series, a no contest in the Contender Series, is ultimately what lands him back in the UFC in 2018. Takes 3 straight losses to Rayani Barcelos, who he outstruck 102-82. Shane Burgos, who subbed him in the first round, November of 2018. And then he loses to Thiago Moises, May of 2019 by unanimous decision, 66-39 on the striking, 4 takedowns to 2. Connor, he lost 3 in a row to Rayani Barcelos, Shane Burgos, and Thiago Moises. That almost means a little bit more to me than like the wins that Austin Hubbard does have in the UFC. And, I think Austin Hubbard is the better overall fighter here. But I don't know. Like, I think ultimately, like, Kurt will end up on the ground. And I think that Austin can definitely handle himself on the feet. I think you got to favor Austin here, but like, you'd be dumb to sleep on Kurt Holloway because the dude's an animal and he only fought killers across, the greater part of a decade in the UFC, or at least guys that, had the skill to hang around. Pat Healy, a name that people definitely remember. Hubbard, minus 180. I think he wins this fight like 65 to 70 times out of 100. And so I would probably go Hubbard by decision. I think Hubbard by decision is plus 170. I think that's as good as you're going to do with him. And Holloway, I think you go Holloway by TKO knockout. That's plus 750. And I don't think that's nuts because Austin, he has not been finished by night. He's been subbed, but he hasn't really fought anybody that was capable of that. So I will forgive that part. I think that Kurt Holloway is a solid, maybe plus 150 could be a decent value. Watch that number because if it gets up to plus 175, Kurt starts to look really good. But if I have to pick an outcome, I guess I'm going by TKO knockout. Maybe decision plus 340. I think actually might be the better value, but those are close.
Yeah, no, I'm all in on Holloway for this. I mean, I do think that overall Hubbard may be a better fighter, but I think there are a lot of factors in play when it comes to this, especially since they're coming out of the tough house. But I mean, Holloway just looks so impressive against Jason Knight, who is legitimately a good fighter. I think he's just going to keep riding that hot streak. I think Hubbard may come in a little bit like the Roosevelt fight, where it looked like a sparring match. I think he'll turn it up a bit, but I could see him still being somewhat reserved. And Holloway's going to go out there looking to murder him in 2 minutes. So I think in this specific situation, I'm taking Holloway all day, and I love him by knockout up plus 750. That is a great value.
And Connor, folks, I texted Connor within the past week and said, can you imagine if the stakes in this were like they were in the first time and the other couple of times they brought veterans back on the Ultimate Fighter and there was a title shot on the line? At lightweight, that would be ridiculous.
Yeah.
Bantamweight, even though Corey Sandhagen would most likely murder whoever wins this season of the Bantamweight Tough, like it would still make this fight super exciting. And I think that, at this point, the quality of fighters that were in this veterans group, if you beat all those guys in a row, you might be in consideration. You'd at least probably be a ranked fighter in the bantamweight division, even though it's a competitive group. But to move on to, I love this, and I really wish that it would have been Brad and Teamer.
Me too. Absolutely, me too.
I thought they were the two best why they paired them up like as early as, why they did Hubbard and Roosevelt. And I don't get that part. And Brad got a really close decision against Teamer too, as I recall. But let's say they have this separately. The Brad Katona is the -175 favorite. And shout out to his girlfriend, Katie Saul, who is a former guest on this show. She's a fantastic person. She's an Invicta atomweight, and she is very possibly in a relationship with the guy that will be the first person to win tough 2 times.
Man, you got to follow up with her if he does and see if you can get an interview with Brad.
Well, it's wild because, like, for where they train, it's like just by interviewing Katie Saul, I'm now like debatably 1 to 2 degrees from Conor McGregor. So if I can just figure out a way to leverage that, I could be a billionaire in trouble with the mob by next year.
I like the way you think, man. Make sure you bring me along with this ride.
But Cody Gibson, the +145 underdog. And Connor, again, I haven't seen the most recent episode of Tough. I usually catch up on it later in the week. How did Cody Gibson win against Rico?
It was a submission, and it was actually really interesting. So, Gibson had a knee injury, and immediately his opponent came out, started slamming leg kicks, didn't look very good. But then he fell. His opponent fell, and Gibson just immediately jumped on him, took the back, took the body triangle, and then just from there, just dominated on the ground. He absolutely dominated. And then the funniest part was that his opponent managed to stand up. So he stands up, shakes him off his back, and Gibson falls in front of him. This man follows him back to the ground. Gibson immediately reverses it and locks in a choke. It was one of the worst displays of fight IQ I've ever seen. I think Katona wins this most of the time anyway, but with Gibson's knee injury, I'm not sure how long a torn MCL can how long it takes to rehab that, but I think that may still be a lingering issue for Gibson. And I'm taking Katona all day in this, even though I do not like Brad Katona. He gives me the creeps.
I mean, okay, so I will say, like, his features are quite striking. I love, like, I've fallen in love with doing an impression of him. Like, when I'm watching The Ultimate Fighter, like, when people ask me who my loyalty's to, is it to Team McGregor or Team Chandler? I'd probably say my loyalty is to Brad Katona. But, like, yeah, he is a guy that never should have been cut from the UFC. Brad Katona started off with 2 wins. He then and wins the Ultimate Fighter. And that's how he got into the UFC. Then he loses to Merab and Hunter Azure, and he's out. It doesn't make any sense. The only theory that has any logic to it is that Dana White was planning a really good season of veterans on the Ultimate Fighter, which would be the most underwhelming conspiracy theory of all time. But
I think that's definitely what happened.
And Brad Katona was born in 1991. Cody Gibson, he was 1-3 in the UFC. His fights were back in 2014 and 15. He was born in 1987. He's 35 years old. Losses to Manny, the Anvil Gambarian, Manny Gambarian. Lost to Aljamain Sterling, but lost to Douglas Silva de Andrade, a win over Johnny Bedford. It's not necessarily about, like, Cody Gibson's record in the UFC versus Brad Katona's. The fact that Brad's is more recent, the fact that one of his losses is to a guy in Merab, who is now occupying the upper echelon of the bantamweight division, and Hunter Azure, who I think a lot of fighters would, can lose a fight to on any given night in the UFC or not. I just, from what I've seen on this season of The Ultimate Fighter, I have seen Cody Gibson impressively finish several guys that are not in his league and that do not belong in the UFC. Brad Katona had an underwhelming first fight in the Ultimate Fighter, but he really brought it to Tamir, and he did all the things that he needed to do to win. He executed a good game plan. He stuck to his strengths, and ultimately he got the decision right. It was close, but a win over Timur Valiev is huge. It says so much about where Brad Katona is at right now. He looks just very competent. He was never finished in the UFC. All of his fights were unanimous decisions, either wins or losses. I think you gotta go Brad Katona by decision. Those prop odds are not available at the moment, but I think Brad Katona minus 175 is going to have a pretty nice number for Katona by decision. I think it's the most likely outcome for him by far. And if I'm Cody Gibson, if I'm betting on Cody Gibson, I think you have to believe that like what he's done to several other people, he's capable of doing to Brad Katona, just he hasn't gotten the chance to yet. And that's the thing. The knee injury was something that obviously only Team Chandler knew about for a long time. I don't know if it became well publicized before Cody's fight with Rico, but I'm sure that there's rumblings about it being Brad that spilled the beans because they were afraid of that in the first place. Katona by decision, Gibson inside the distance if I'm going with him. I think Katona fight 75 times out of 100.
I think if Gibson wins, it's going to be by submission. And you should definitely go watch the most recent episode of The Ultimate Fighter before the fight card this Saturday, because Gibson just looked like an animal on the ground. I mean, it was beautiful. So I think if, somehow he manages to take Katona down or reverse Katona, and he gets, that top position, especially if he mounts him or maybe side control. And I think from there, he could definitely beat Katona. I like Gibson by sub if you're going with him.
And yeah, it's just that it's hard to know what the wins mean when they came against the prospects, because we know that these aren't the real prospects for the UFC. We see them on the Contender Series, or we see them get contracts without having to do an audition. But Connor's hanging around for one more fight. It's a great one at the middleweight division, 185 pounds, about between Andre Petroski and Gerald Meerschaert. It's going to be a dogfight. And surprisingly, Petroski is the minus 238 favorite. Meerschaert the plus 195 underdog. I loved Petroski when you could get him at plus 225 as an underdog, because no one knew that he is, a very well-rounded fighter, even though he made it to the UFC kind of at a later age. He was, I think it was against Nick Maximoff too, that he was like plus 250, something nuts. Gerald Meerschaert being the underdog here, that would make me nervous as someone rooting for Andre Petroski. But Gerald Meerschaert, he is technically the winner of 4 of his last 6 fights, but he has only won 1 of his last 3. And that dates back to April of 2022. Unanimous decision loss to Christoph Jotko, a third-round guillotine victory over Bruno Silva August of last year. And then April of this year against Joe Pyfer at UFC 287, he got knocked out in the first round. He did have a 3-fight winning streak before that over Bartosz Fabinski, Mahmoud Muradov, and Dustin Stoltzfus. 3 submissions in that time in rounds 1, 2, and 3. He has lost to the likes of Eric Anders, Kevin Holland, Ian Heinich, Hamzat Chimaev, Jack Hermanson. He's Thiago Santos. He's been in the UFC since December of 2016. Andre Petroski, he was a semi-finalist on The Ultimate Fighter when he was knocked out of the tournament by Brian Battle, the eventual winner. I think that if Petroski would have ended up fighting Tresean Gore, because I don't think that matchup happened, I think he would have destroyed Tresean. So I think the best 2 fighters on that season were Andre and Brian Battle. But he has won all 4 fights in the UFC. He beat Michael Gilmore, who was also an Ultimate Fighter contestant, who was eliminated by 3rd-round knockout August of 2021. He beat Hu Yao Zhang by 3rd-round arm triangle October 30th, 2021. Then a round 1 anaconda choke over Nick Maximoff, May of 2022, very early in the fight. And coming off a fantastic performance November of 2022 at UFC 281 over Wellington Turman. He outstruck him 42-41, took him down 8 times to 1. So the real problem is I don't know how Petrosky wins this fight other than like exactly how Krzysztof Jotko won it, except just with lower striking numbers probably and a greater takedown differential. But Gerald's very sneaky. He's good at avoiding what you're best at a lot of the time, or at least making it difficult on you. I think that this matchup was kind of made for Petrosky to get an impressive 5th straight UFC victory against a recognizable name. Things have not been going well for Gerald Meerschaert. The Joe Pyfer fight was not a good indication, even though that guy has now won 3 in a row. I think Petrosky wins this fight by, I think you have to go, I would just say inside the distance. I don't know exactly how it's going to go, but I think that it'll be kind of a mad scramble to a finish between these two guys. Petrosky inside the distance, that's minus 110. By TKO knockout, plus 400. By submission, plus 175. I just do think it's possible that Petrosky wears on him enough or hurts him on the feet and then gets down to the ground and puts it away. At that point, the way you finish the fight is really just up to you and on your whim in a situation like that. But I feel safe with Petrosky inside the distance, minus 110. If I'm going Meerschaert, I think you go, probably by submission. I think you kind of have to. Meerschaert by submission is plus 300. That's a solid value. And I'm less confused about his prop for sure. But Petrosky inside the distance, that's the one I would go with, minus 110. If I had to pick a specific route for an inside the distance victory, obviously I'm going Petrosky by submission plus 175. And I think Petrosky wins this fight 70 times out of 100.
Yeah, I'm all in on Petrosky by KO here. I think he's going to do exactly what Dana said, be like Joe Pyfer, get an impressive KO victory.
All right, folks, Connor's going to take off. We got only 2 fights left to discuss, both women's flyweight matchups on the early prelims. Connor, thanks for being here tonight. Connor Bones Slone, frequent guest co-host on the show, helping me out with UFC 292. Have a good night, man.
You too. Thank you, Brady.
All right, folks, we got 2 fights left, and we are to Andrea Lee versus Natalia Silva. Andrea Lee is the plus 280 underdog. Crazy to see that at this point. But Natalia Silva has warranted that. She is the minus 355 favorite. Let's start with Andrea KGB Lee, born in 1989. She has won 2 fights of her last 7. Now, those losses were to pillars of the women's flyweight division: Joanne Wood, Lauren Murphy, Roxanne Modafari. Everybody loves Roxanne. And then 2 losses in a row, May of 2022 and March of this year, both by decision. Pretty close fights, too, to Vivian Araujo and Macy Barber most recently. She did have 5 takedowns on Macy Barber. That's why it was a split decision. She had 2 wins in the year 2021, both second-round finishes, a triangle armbar and a knockout TKO over Antonina Shevchenko and Cynthia Calvillo, respectively. Natalia Silva, on the other hand, born in 1997, she's on a 3-fight winning streak in the UFC. According to Tapology, Natalia Silva is now the number 15 women's flyweight fighter in the world. Andrea Lee still hanging around at number 14. That's kind of hard to defend at this point. But those 3 wins for Natalia Silva. First of all, 2 straight knockouts. One was a spinning back kick against Teresa Bleda, who she outstruck 45-18 in November of last year. May of this year, a first-round knockout over Victoria Leonardo. Solid. Victoria Leonardo has not done a lot of winning in the UFC for sure. Neither has Teresa Bleda, technically 2-1 the UFC. That's good. But when you look back at a fight that was barely a year ago, June 18, 2022, against Jasmine Jasudavicius, who is now a ranked flyweight in the UFC. Love Jasmine Jasudavicius, former guest on this show. Great to see her succeed. But she really got just overpowered and just run through in that Natalia. So she was not ready for that for whatever reason. And it made me think that, Jasmine, it really made me question Jasmine's ceiling in the UFC. But now you see that Jasmine is a very high-quality fighter who just got a huge win that really catapulted her in her standing in the weight class and in the sport. So to outstrike Jasmine 96-31, to beat her up the way that she did, to do the damage that she did and land 2 takedowns. Jasmine, just now, you just marvel at how amazingly tough she was to be the one opponent that Natalia Silva did not knock out, despite the strikes that she landed. Now, Andrea Lee has never been knocked out in the UFC. She's never lost a fight inside the distance even. She goes to decision a lot, and she is the kind of fighter that is really good at doing the things that make a fight close on the judges' scorecards. But that has just started to tip against her. The 2 wins against Cavillo and Antonina just seem a generation ago. And the 2 losses since then, again, they were close for sure, but this is not going to be the same thing. These are not, prospects of medium quality. These aren't fighters that are really good, wise fighters like Roxanne, Lauren Murphy, and Joanne Calderwood, who have been around for a long time. Natalia Silva is going to be moving at a speed that Andrea Lee is not equipped to deal with, and with power that she's not equipped to deal with at this point in her UFC career. She hasn't really been. This is going to be a unique test for both of them, for sure. Andrea Lee is a veteran of this division. That is going to be a real test for Natalia Silva. Having said that, Silva minus 355, as we said. I think she wins this fight like 75 to 80 times out of 100. Hot knife through butter style. TKO knockout is plus 350. And this is the problem. I don't know if Andrea Lee is just super tough, or if that's just not necessarily how her opponents are. Her style certainly protects her from a certain amount of damage. But, Silva by decision is plus 115. I think that's probably the way to go. Andrea Lee might have some moments. She probably won't get a round. She might have some rounds where it's like, oh, okay, that was a better round. She had that going for her. But I think ultimately 30-27, 30-26 could even happen if Andrea Lee does turn out to be tough enough to deal with that. So I think just with the way Andrea Lee's career has gone, it's hard to pick Silva by TKO knockout. The people that she knocked out are not of Andrea Lee's quality and experience level in the UFC. So Silva, to make it worthwhile, someone who is a minus 355 favorite, Silva by decision plus 115. If you're going Andrea Lee, you go Lee by decision plus 450. And she's a plus 280 underdog, so that speaks volumes. That's how she wins, is, she has even only 1 submission in her whole time in the UFC. So many of her fights go to the judges' scorecards. This fight going to decision is minus 165. And if Lee gets, the 20 or 25 wins of these out of 100 or even less, all of them are going to come by decision, getting a handful of takedowns and slowing the fight down to the pace that she can handle. Next up and last, but not least on a great card, another women's flyweight matchup, Karine Silva taking on Marina Moroz. And according to Tapology, these women rank number 20 and number 21 in the world, respectively, at women's flyweight. Marina Moroz is the plus 124 underdog. Karine Silva, the minus 148 favorite. Let's start with Moroz. I hope you're not feeling too morose on Saturday, because this is all this card is fantastic. A lot of hot knife through butter situations and hard to move forces and hard to move objects. There's great fights on this card. And this could be a good one too, because I like Karine Silva. Marina Moroz lost her last time out, and that was all the way back in just November of 2022. Unanimous decision loss to Jennifer Maia. Got outstruck 109-80. She had 3 wins in a row before that over Sabina Mazo, who's no longer in the UFC, Mayra Bueno Silva, both by unanimous decision. Then she got Maria Agapova, March of 2022, by second-round arm triangle. She has lost in her UFC career to Angela Hill by decision, Carla Esparza by decision. She still landed, 84 strikes against Hill, 38-40 against Carla Esparza. She did get taken down 6 times. That could be a problem. But, wins over Danielle Taylor. She won against Joanne Wood in 2015. That's crazy. That's crazy. Karine Silva, born in 1993. She's 3-0 in the UFC. Started out with a round 2 guillotine win in the Contender Series over Yang Kui, October of 2021. June of 2022, she gets a round 1 Darce choke over Polyana Vitello, who didn't do a lot of winning in the UFC, but she fought tough fighters for the most part and came out with 3 wins. And then her last time out, June of this year, very recent, first round submission. It's labeled as other lock on UFCstats.com over Ketlin Souza. Was this might have been the freaky arm thing that happened, actually. Now that I recall. Karine Silva is a really good prospect. She is not of the level of Natalia Silva, but she's a slight tier below. It's like the Tom Aspinall versus Sergey Spivak, but on a much lower scale. It's just like, it's weird because Morose only has 2 fights since March of 2022. She had a 2-year gap in between. It just seems like that 3-fight winning streak is a long time ago. But so to land 80 strikes against Jennifer Maia, you lose by unanimous decision to Jennifer Maia. That happens. I don't know. This is a hard one to call. I just love that Karina Silva has been a lot more active naturally. She's put all of her fights away, granted, against a much different level of competition. So I think that this fight is kind of appropriately handicapped. But I don't know. Morose probably gets this fight, or could conceivably, based on the wins that she has in her career, 40, maybe even 45 times out of 100, giving the nod to Silva's upward trajectory. Even though, like, there's not even a big, Karine Silva's only 2 years younger. She is nicknamed Killer. That helps. I think that Morose, if she wins the fight, probably does it by unanimous decision. She's shown the ability to land at a high volume of strikes like she did against Mayra Bueno Silva, 139, and still got 2 takedowns. The win over Sabina Mazo doesn't mean a whole lot to me, but the Jennifer Maia performance, like, I don't know if Karine Silva would be able to look, anywhere close to that against Jennifer Maia at this point. It's just a weird limited sample size for Karine that just gives us a little bit, but just not quite enough for me to give her that much credit. So I think Morose wins this fight like 40 to 45 times out of 100. Plus 124. Watch that number, because I feel like there's going to be people more believing in Karine Silva at this point, and especially in Silva inside the distance or by submission, of which Morose has never lost by submission, at least in the UFC, and she's had a lot of fights in the UFC. Her only losses have been by unanimous decision. So, maybe this is a fight that Karine Silva does have to take the distance. We haven't seen her do that at this level, though. I don't know what it looks like. So I still think if you're picking a prop for Karine Silva, you got to go with what she's shown us so far. You go Silva by submission. That's plus 188. That's fair. And then, Silva by decision plus 260. That is not enough reward for me over what we've already seen her do. If this trajectory is real, if what we're thinking about Karine is actually there, this should be a fight that if she wins, she still comes away with doing what she's been able to do and getting the submission, because she's just really good at that. So Silva by submission plus 188, that is the best prop for her. Morose plus 124. I like her as a straight up victor for sure. But I think you go Morose just by decision, plus 260. I think that's plenty enough value for what you're getting over plus 124 as a straight up victory. I don't think that she subs Karine Silva, which I think would be the next most likely outcome. That's plus 500. I don't like it. And folks, that is it for a very exciting pay-per-view coming up on Saturday, UFC 292. I am Brady Grove. I just brought you episode 106 of RotoBallers Official MMA Podcast. Tap that. Follow me on Twitter at RotoBrady for all of my picks for all major MMA promotions, boxing, everything combat sports. I'm making picks for it. We've got the Contender Series going on. PFL playoffs are happening on Friday. Freak boxing matches galore. Follow me, leave favorable reviews and comments, like and subscribe on YouTube and the Facebook page. Go to Spotify, do it as well. That is the Tap That MMA podcast. Look out for the interlude episodes that are going to be coming out soon. I am partnering up with the Eastern Kentucky University Colonel's Athletic Department, bringing you some content from that neck of the woods. Folks, thanks for listening. Have yourselves a great weekend. Enjoy what is sure to be an awesome card. Thanks. Peace.